My name is Larry Warren, and I was a witness to the 1980 Bentwaters UFO events. And what we're going to do today is return to the sites in question, the main site of the activity where the big night of events, I should say, took place, and also to see both bases which are now closed and point out key sites.
My name is Peter Robbins. I'm an independent researcher and writer who's been working with Larry Warren developing this Bentwaters story into a book called Left at Eastgate. We've been working together for 6.5 years, and I'll be along for the ride today on our trip. Right now I'm standing with my back to the main, to the entrance, to the gate entrance at RAF Bentwaters, now closed, that Larry Warren first exited through on the night of his involvement in the incident. If Tony pans the camera, you'll see a deserted gate entrance that was of such high security at a certain point you couldn't even get close to it.
We're at the far end of RAF Woodbridge's field, and as you can see, the air base is closed down like Bentwaters too. This is the area right to my left where we had our first roadblock, and I'll point it out right across here. And they stopped a civilian's car that night. The woman was obviously trying to go down Eastgate Road. It was very late, and they told her there were unexploded ordnance in the area, and they wouldn't delay her long, and that was just so our convoy of vehicles could pass and head down this road. And at this point I had no idea what was happening. I'm standing at Eastgate at RAF Woodbridge, and it's right behind me actually. And on the 27th of December, a security police patrol observed lights for the first time out in that direction, down Eastgate Road in Rendlesham Forest. And of course, all the trees are gone now, but it was a tall pine forest at that time. And the first reports were made to Central Security Control right from that guard shack right there, reporting these lights, and they were given permission to go out and investigate the sightings. One law enforcement officer and 2 security people went out into the woods and had a series of extraordinary events take place. Also, some abductions possibly took place. The next night, certain events happened that are unclear, and the third night, we'll be taking you to the site next to show the site where I was involved directly and witness what I saw, which is out in Rendlesham Forest. But this is Eastgate, where it all began. Okay, well, I wrote this a few days ago. I try to leave little markers for anyone who cares in the future. And this is a Forestry Commission sign, and it says, "Walkers are welcome in this wood." And then I wrote UFO 26 to 29 December 1980. You have the right to know the truth, for you folks in England. And for further information, and I added, contact your government. And I wrote a former member of the 81st Security Police, USAF. And it should be a marker here for this stuff. On the night of December 29th, 1980, this is as far as we got in the vehicles into Rendlesham Forest, and we all stopped. This was more of a circular area at that time. It's been spread out due to clearing of trees, and there was an armory vehicle parked right about here. We turned in our weapons, which we shouldn't have had off the base anyway, and moved into the woods with, some people had sidearms, I did not, with Motorola radios, which I had to turn off. The lower ranking guys had to maintain radio silence. Colonel Holt met Lieutenant England, who was in my truck, and they moved out on this path when I first got here with a small group of people back into the woods. We had a lot of lighting equipment here that did not work as soon as we got out in this area. I had still no idea what was happening. After about 10-15 minutes here, I could see a lot of activity down at the end of this road at the time. Lights, flashlights moving, flashlights in the woods, a lot of radio transmissions. We gathered into a 5-man group. I was with Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. A captain from the base arrived. He was with us, and we broke up into small units and moved out through the woods. I then went down this path. It's impassable now because of the new trees, but we got down this path and turned right and continued that way through dense forest with trees much like this right here. They're all gone now. To give you an idea that there was a lot of spread between them. As we walked, I started to see flares off to my left at about 100 yards or so in the woods with red surveyor's tape surrounding it. And we heard on the radios, the one senior guy in our group who had the radio running, we want you guys to avoid those hot spots. We don't want you walking all over them. And that obviously meant radiation areas where this other object had been seen moving through the woods that same night. No idea what was going on. Thought we were fighting a forest fire or assisting in that. We continued on through the woods. There were British personnel here. There were bobbies from the town of Woodbridge present. They went up that way. There was a British police car that went down that way, and you can hear it on the actual halt tape, it pulling up. And they were witnesses to this event that you're going to see also. If it was scary, it's scary out here at night no matter what. But, and not knowing why you're out here, but obviously something very serious is going on.
My back is to the logging road that we've walked in on, to this area called Capel Green, which was the site of the incident on the third night of incidents for RAF Bentwaters. You folks that are with us right now are the first English UFO researchers who have ever been walked into this area by an eyewitness who was involved in that night. With the exception of myself, our friends the Warnocks, to the best of our knowledge, no one has come back to this area with an awareness of where they were, what happened. Here we go, follow the man.
Well, there's a couple things to set up because you've probably read about them, but obviously I didn't make this route coming in. I came in through here. There were tall trees at the time, and this is where I started to see that there was something ahead of me that was very out of the ordinary. Walking through, we kept saying, a buddy of mine next to me, Adrian Bustinza, said, "This is just like what happened to me in Alaska." And I'm like, "What happened to you in Alaska?" I have no idea what this man's talking about. There was an old tree. Here's the stump right here. Literally, Central Casting couldn't make this up. This was a tree in 1980. This is the stump, Peter. We found it again. And I came up and I saw my flight chief, Robert Ball, attending to another airman I knew. He was rather new on the base also, who had his head in his hands, sitting right here. Really out of control, very upset, and I was in kind of perceptive shock at this time. Really, everything blended together. If you turn around, the field was illuminated. This field right over this rise. It was illuminated, and I'm looking at it. We walked by this, not by light all, by this object on the ground. These brambles that you're seeing were tearing at my legs and everyone else. There was an old fence here at the time. It's gone now. Barbed wire. Be careful. And we were accused of breaking a fence. Well, I don't know about that, these stories, but the fence was flat, so we walked right through. And I'll describe what I saw next.
Geez, Larry, it's really amazingly apparent today. Look at it.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
Well, the first thing that happened, this is the field. We came to this rise and I stopped right about here. There was security police all over the place. This tree was illuminated a yellow, and I used it as a marker that night. Off in the distance you'll see a farmer's house, and the light on the left second floor window was illuminated, and there was a white car parked there. You could see it. This thing illuminated everything. There was a circular... Peter, go to the dead center. You're going to bear to your... No, you're going to bear more left. Peter's heading right now to the approximate... Keep going. Stop. He is probably in dead center where this illuminated, transparent light on the ground. It was a foot in height. It wasn't hovering or anything. It was a circular thing, probably 50 feet across. It was self-illuminated. You could see through it at times. This field was all green grass, just like you see out there in December of 1980. And you could see through it at times. Right over here, Peter, walk to about where the cameras were set up. You want to come back this way, and you want to stop right there. There were Air Force or our base photo labs or public affairs cameras set up. One big motion picture camera and one small, well, at that time video technology was quite bulky, smaller video camera. There was a lot of personnel over in this area. The second fence was not here. We were told to move on into the field. Sergeant Bastinza and I stopped right about in this area. The first thing I noticed, that I watched the cameras shooting all the while. This mist object was a good 20 feet away from me. It was only this high off the ground. It was not hovering, and that's been misrepresented through the years. It was about this big, high, and we were watching it. There was a lot of security police from D-Flight. 2 English bobbies are right over here. Over in that way, some senior personnel started to move into the area from beyond that big log over there. If you see that tree turned down, that's where the senior officers started to come into the field. As we were watching this, there were disaster preparedness personnel out here with Geiger counters going in a almost half clockwise motion around this thing on the ground. The next thing I know, Sergeant Bastinza nudges me on the arm. I see the lights on in that house. I'm saying, Christ, somebody's watching this also. Still, again, you wouldn't have thought this was a flying... It wasn't. It was a solidified mist. That's all I can describe it as. Sergeant Bastinza knocked me on the arm, and 2 cows were walking. At this time, there had to be farm life here, farm animals. 2 cows walked up and were staring at this mist also on the ground. I never saw them again after this next event I described happened. We never saw them again. I can't say what happened. I used this tree as a marker. I think we've shown that. It was illuminated, and I said I have to come back to this area. And sure enough, that tree is no different than it was. From that stand of center trees right there that crop out toward this field, I noticed a small red light over the top of them. It moved in. We thought it was an aircraft. I did, because the runway is just about 1.5 miles that way. And it moved in over the field in a downward arc so fast, stopped. It hovered about 20 feet off the ground. It was the size of a basketball, American basketball, self-illuminated, not quite red yet. That's the closest I can describe it. As soon as you could get a fix on it, this thing exploded. Light showered down where Peter is. This is how close I was to this event happening, and everyone else. Showered down on this object. I can't tell you how long that happened, but my eyes were flashed out. Some personnel ran right back over this rise into the brush, and a lot of us were left just standing here in shock. In the place of that mist was a solid, all I can say is solid, I didn't touch it, machine. It was about 30 feet across the base. It rose to about 25 feet in a sharp angle. It had delta appendages that came out of it. I can't tell for sure if there was landing gear or not. It was so low to the ground. No windows, no markings, no flag or country of origin, nothing. You could hardly look at it dead on. If you looked at it at the side of your peripheral vision, you'd get a shape of it. And there it was, clear as a bell. We could not move. At one point, through this event, which seems like a dream state at this point, if you can imagine, I couldn't, even thinking about it now, can't really comprehend the full dimensions of it. Myself, Sergeant Bastinza, one of the disaster preparedness gentlemen, and my shift commander moved in on this object. We were ordered to move in on it for whatever reason. I walked like this, clearly, and I'll use probably within this much distance. Say Peter is the front face of the object. Standing this close, we cast shadows upon it that went up at an angle. They had Geiger counters near it. We had to walk back and forth. We walked at this angle, and we had no armament, so there was no useful reason for this. And we walked back. There was a light that would come down on the shadows of our heads. Now, to cause a shadow effect on this object is strange because we couldn't get lighting equipment into this forest. None of them would work. But it was pulling our shadows. It's starting to rain, but the next thing that happened is that we went back to our position. Cameras are rolling all the while right over here. We went to a covered wagon, which is the whole object was surrounded by security police at intervals of about 10 feet between a man all the way around it. There was a lot of personnel out here. This light moved out from the side over here. I'll show you. And it moved like this. And it came around. It was one piece of light this wide. It was about this high off the ground. The light split into 3 individual, not round things, but almost cylinders of light, and then started to dim. Within the light, you could see clearly what looked like eyes, facial features, bright clothing, and some other device or something, but the legs and the lower extremities you really couldn't make out. It was almost translucent, a bluish gold light. This thing stood here, it floated here, it moved toward the front. There was a lot of activity, cameras flashing all the while. Our wing commander, Gordon Williams, came in from that area with senior officers. He walked like this. I recognized him. He was 6'7" or so, very tall man. Walked up, conversed with other people in his group. Also Donald Moreland, who was the squadron leader at the time, was present. Walked further up within this much distance to walk toward me, Peter, and I'll show you the proximity. You want to stop now. To these 3 beings, or whatever you wish to call it. What gave reality to the event is that the center one adjusted its head to his height. That said to me that these things were in fact alive. There was no sign language, contrary to good editing on our American home box office from a BBC interview. There was no handshakes, and there was no exchange of Milky Way candy bars. What happened next was basically just a face-off. If there was any communication, it was telepathy. Who can say? I don't know. I've never said those things. Funny enough, Gordon Williams looked. There was a sound in the woods that sounded like a tree breaking. I don't know what it was. These things retracted under a delta type of thing. Their arms, which you could see arms, moved up tight. And then after a standoff for a minute, it was very tense, they moved back closer. You can come in more here. And I'm standing right there watching. I was about 25 feet away from all this activity. He was looking down. These things, remind you, were about this big physically. Off the ground still. There was no standing, no three-dimensional shape to them. About this point, I'm over here, and my boss, my shift commander, tapped us out. He was saying, return to the vehicles. We went back up over the rise, the way we came in exactly, headed back to the trucks, and now back in the parking area, just after I left, we were seeing strange lights in the sky. We were seeing these blue type of things moving around. These things passed through lighting equipment. I didn't witness that. One of the gentlemen with us was driving one of the pickup trucks. He got into the pickup truck, and one of these creatures, or whatever you want to call it, they had followed us right down the road, and they're very interested in all the lighting equipment, and they would start them up, just like Unsolved Mysteries. If they passed through it, they could go through metal and whatever. This gentleman got in the pickup truck. This creature or whatever passed, I talked to him, passed right through the windshield. He could see its face clearly. This guy went bonkers and kicked the windshield right out of the truck, back at the first area where we parked, if you can recall. John Burroughs, who was off duty this particular night, he's a figure that's come into prominence, was also out here that night, but only as far as that parking area. He was not allowed here because he was off duty, and Colonel Holt and others thought he was rather obsessed. The 2 British bobbies were also taking pictures with one camera, and though it's been said that I and Bustinza retrieved the film from him by orders of Colonel Holt, I had nothing to do with it. I did watch that take place where the cameras were just taken away, and there was a protest and whatever. We found out that these bobbies are no longer police officers in Woodbridge. One has had a severe mental breakdown, one has an alcoholic problem, and has been basically ridiculed off the force. Again, the next thing that happened is that when we left, John Burroughs, after I'd left the area, headed back to Woodbridge, totally screwed up over what I had seen or thought I'd seen. John Burroughs had in front of him and Sergeant Bustinza, who did not return with me, a triangular object much smaller than what I've just described here appear in that parking area. right in the midst of the men returning. John Burroughs was in civilian clothes or whatever. He had gone through the first night of events, and I shouldn't be telling his story, but this is verbatim as he told it to me, and it hasn't been reproduced accurately so far. He literally, if you've heard of someone literally grabbing an object, John Burroughs did so. It grabbed it, it was this small so he could literally reach around it, and it moved 10 meters with him holding on to it. And he's suffered severe health effects, no matter what he says, for doing that. It changed the lives of everyone who was involved in these events, and they were quite considerable. We have statements in our book from others, even people right next to me. And I'll just say this is your country, and you have a right to know what happened in this farmer's field in 1980. There's no question about it.
At that moment that I'm saying now.
It's a thrill, really, because it's like a release of energy. You can just say, hey,
all right.
for better for worse, and there is enough evidence to back it up other than just my mouth flapping.
Well, that
And
was
it's good.
also
It's
part
good.
of the thing. I mean,
It's only 14 years ago, really. Roswell's 1,000. And so it was just snapped off at the top.
I think
Yep.
partly
The
because
storm did that.
I've always considered myself an independent.
This was all dirt track.
This was this may have been grass, but at that time. I'm sure it was still grass, but where we were was just dirt. They've thrown stone in since the damage, and they have heavy equipment coming down.
And this is where all the vehicles came down that night.
Well, no, the vehicles that I was in stopped at that first clearing that he
Oh,
filmed,
right.
but the staff cars for Gordon Williams, they were at a New Year's Eve party on the base, which they had before New Year's because of different schedules, and he was called out of it to come here. He was in a flight jacket, a flight suit with black, maybe tuxedo pants, and his hat with the colonel, full colonel on it. And they came down this far because they came in through right over here, around that tree, out into the site. But,
in northern England.
you know, a lot of the fencing's been replaced too since then. It's very strange. I don't know why we didn't drive down this far. We walked through the woods, but there was so much different activity out here, seen by so many different kinds of things, according to Colonel Holt, that went on. Beams coming down to the ground and everything. The creature or whatever that went through the windshield, at the other end of it, when it came out, a beam shot down to the ground in that first area that I showed you. And according to the witness that described this to me, I didn't see it. It ran right up the beam into something that was dark. They couldn't see it. It just literally went right up it. Sounds like a movie, but too many people saw these things. I don't know. They described it, and it was, no, just dull little lights on it. Yeah. Well, I've heard very similar. I heard an exact description from a guy on Long Island, New York, that happened in 1972 of a red light coming in over a fog on the ground and transforming into this thing, except there were two of them on the end of a street. And that was just last year. This guy told me about it. He didn't know me or anything. And, whoa! But it wasn't. I can't say it really was a flying object, because I only saw that red light, and that certainly wasn't what the whole picture was. Very bizarre, and I don't know if the effects of seeing this can affect how your perception is. I'm sure, but it's worth looking into, folks.
But then to counterpoint it with
Where's Dave?
what we're looking at now are the earthen-covered nuclear, well, what we call the weapons storage area. And that is atomic weapons storage area on RAF Bentwaters, the now decommissioned American base. All of the American atomic weapons that were on this base, and that we understand some of which were still on this base 6 months ago in October 1993 on our last trip, were stored in those rather innocuous-looking structures. Now, also, if the camera pans slightly to the left, you'll see a low tower over those kind of barn-type structures. That is the WSA Tower, and that is the location from which the UFOs in the 1980 incident that Larry was involved in were first observed.
all deserted now. Were you shooting this when the base was open, they would be here already because you would have set off the sensors in the fence.